My name is Elizabeth. I'm 60 years old and I live by myself in the house my late husband and I shared for years. My husband passed away a few years ago, and since then, life has felt a bit quieter and slower. I have a set routine that I stick to each day, and I find comfort in the familiar surroundings of this old house. It was a lovely, cool afternoon. It's the perfect temperature for wrapping up in something warm. I was tidying up in the kitchen, humming to myself, when I noticed a small puddle of water near the cupboard under the sink. I looked down and saw that the pipe under the sink was leaking a little. At first, it was just a slow drip, but it quickly got worse. It was leaving a wet, messy spot on the floor. I tried to put it out of my mind, thinking it wasn't a big deal. I thought I could just put a bucket under the pipe for a few days, but after a while, I realized it wasn't going away on its own. I finally decided to call a plumber. I came across a flyer for a local handyman service in a drawer. It had been there for years. I figured it was meant to be because I finally got through to them. I gave the problem a quick rundown to a friendly voice on the other end of the line. The guy on the other end said they'd send someone over right away. He said there was a plumber named Ben who was in the area. I felt a bit relieved. I wouldn't have to worry about that annoying leak anymore. While I was waiting, I decided to get ready for a shower. It felt like a good time to relax, especially since I'd spent the whole morning cleaning and organizing. I went upstairs to the bathroom. I let the warm steam fill the room as I turned on the shower. I wrapped myself in a thick, fluffy white towel, the kind that feels like a warm hug. It felt comforting and soft against my skin. I liked the feeling of being wrapped up like that, with nothing else underneath. I was holding on to the towel when I heard a soft knock on the door downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. The plumber had already arrived. I wasn't expecting him to get here so fast. For a moment, I was taken aback. I looked down at myself in the towel and realized I hadn't put anything else on yet. I thought about changing quickly, but then I decided to let it go. After all, he was just here to fix the leak. I was fine with a quick chat without too much fuss, so I went downstairs, just as I was wrapped up in my towel and opened the door. There he was, a tall young man standing on my doorstep. He was probably in his early 30s, with a relaxed, confident look about him. He had bright, friendly eyes and a small, easy smile that made me feel at ease right away. He was dressed in simple work clothes, a worn pair of jeans, a plain shirt, and sturdy boots, with a tool bag slung over one shoulder. "Hi, I'm Ben," he said in a deep, gentle voice, his smile widening as he introduced himself. "Hello, Ben," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks for coming so quickly." "It's no problem." He nodded, so I showed him into the kitchen. My bare feet were padding softly against the floor, still feeling the warmth of the towel around me. I indicated the cupboard under the sink. Ben crouched down by the sink to take a look at the pipe. He opened his tool bag and took out a wrench and a flashlight. He got to work, twisting and adjusting things with great skill. I stood nearby, leaning against the counter, and watched him work. I couldn't help but notice how strong his hands were moving. As he tightened and adjusted each part, I noticed he was calm and focused. I found myself drawn to it, almost mesmerized. At one point, he looked up and our eyes met for a split second. I saw something in his expression, a spark, a hint of surprise, maybe even curiosity. It seemed like he hadn't really noticed me before. He'd noticed me before, but now that he had, he couldn't take his eyes off me. We both froze, staring at each other. I felt my cheeks warm as he took in the sight of me wrapped in nothing but a towel. He seemed to be at a loss for words for a moment, and I found myself feeling both shy and excited. He lingered, taking me in from head to toe. As if he'd just seen something beautiful that he hadn't expected, he got up from where he'd been kneeling, standing just a few steps away from me. I could feel my heart beating a little faster, and I noticed he was breathing a little more deeply too. It was as if he was just as affected as I was. There was a certain electricity in the air between us. We both knew what was going on, but neither of us was willing to say it. His eyes lingered on my towel, and he seemed to be trying to think of something to say. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and I noticed a growing bulge in his jeans. I took a sip of water. He suddenly felt aroused, just from looking at me. I got a warm, tingly feeling all over. At last, he spoke. His voice was a little hoarse. "Everything okay, ma'am?" I was taken aback by the question. "What about your pipes?" He blinked, looking at me. "Would you like me to finish fixing them?" I blinked, a little confused. "Of course," I replied. "Why wouldn't I?" He seemed to be looking for something to say, so I blushed, knowing exactly what he meant. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I saw the desire in his eyes. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe we should take some action." His words sent a chill down my spine. I felt a rush of anticipation, and I found myself unconsciously biting my lip. I'm not sure who started it, but before I knew it, we were standing close, so close that I could feel the warmth from his body. I could feel the roughness of his hands on my cheeks. His fingers traced a light pattern on my skin, and he murmured, "Let me know if you want me to stop." His breath was warm against my lips, and I quietly told him, "Don't stop." I tilted my head up to meet his gaze, and I reached out, and he did the same. Our fingers touched lightly, and his touch sent a chill down my spine. I found myself leaning into him, unable to resist. Then he paused. His hand moved up gently, resting against my cheek. His touch was warm and reassuring, and I found myself leaning into it. When I opened my eyes again, he was looking at me with a look of longing and tenderness that made my heart flutter. Without another word, he leaned down, his face close to mine, and his lips. He kissed me softly and gently, and I felt a rush of warmth spread through me. His kiss was tentative at first, as if he was unsure of how far to go, but I responded, matching his gentleness with my own. The kiss deepened, becoming more intense, and before long, he wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. I felt the towel start to loosen, slipping a bit, but I didn't care. All that mattered was the warmth of his embrace, the way his lips felt against mine, and the way his hands moved to hold me close, steady, and safe. His mouth on mine was incredible. The heat and smell of him were so enticing. It felt incredible to have his body pressed against mine. The towel started to slip a bit, but I didn't mind. All that mattered was how warm he was, how his lips felt against mine, and how he held me close and steady. The way he kissed me was incredible. The heat and smell of him were so enticing, and the feel of his body pressing against mine was amazing. The way he kissed me was so arousing that I felt like I might lose my balance. As the kiss got more intense, he moved his mouth from mine to trace his tongue along my jaw and down my neck. His tongue was warm, and I felt a longing wash over me. His hands kept exploring my body while his tongue kept teasing me. He kept going, moving lower and lower until he kneeled and kissed my abdomen. Then, he gently tugged at the towel, which fell to the floor. I stood there, exposed, feeling a rush of desire throughout my entire body. I was so overwhelmed that I could barely think or breathe. When his hands grabbed my thighs and his tongue started to lick my nipples, I was so turned on I almost screamed, dug my fingers into his shoulders, and rolled my head back. My orgasm built gradually but surely. When his mouth found the spot that sent me over the edge, I let out a loud cry and gripped his shoulders so hard my knuckles turned white. I enjoyed the pleasure for a long time, feeling like I was floating. I was on the brink of falling, but managed to stay upright somehow. I stood there catching my breath and waiting for my senses to return. When I was ready to look at him again, I smiled. Then I reached down to pull him up to me. Our lips met again, and I tasted myself on his mouth. We kissed deeply. I reached down and picked up his lollipop, stroking it gently and smiling as he gasped for air. We stood there, our mouths and bodies locked together, exploring each other with our hands and tongues. I really wanted him, and it was clear he wanted me too, but the anticipation was so arousing it almost took my breath away. Finally, I pulled away, smiling up at him, and then turned around, placing my palms flat against the smooth surface. When his hands traced the contours of my hips, I felt a rush of heat between my legs, closing my eyes and anticipating the sensation of him inside me. At last, he mounted his horse and rode it inside my plate. The sensation was so intense that I let out a small cry, but it felt so good that I was on the verge of losing control. My body was on fire, and when his arms slipped around my waist and his hands slid down between my legs, it felt so intense that I was sure I would lose control. I let out a cry, holding him so tightly that I could feel his heartbeat. His heart was racing, and I could feel his warm breath against my skin. When he put his arms around my waist, he pulled me close and held me tight. I could feel the heat of his skin and the pounding of his heart as he slid deep inside. His fingers grabbed my hips, pulling me closer as he thrust deeper. And it got even more intense when he touched my back with his fingers and spoke in my ear. I couldn't wait any longer. He let out a groan, and I could feel him pulsing inside me. As soon as I heard his voice and the words he said in my ear, I got a feeling like nothing I'd ever had before. It was as if something inside me suddenly gave way. It was a pretty intense and overwhelming sensation. His arms were around my waist, and he was whispering in my ear. His grip loosened, and he ran his hands down the sides of my thighs. I turned around, put my arms around his neck, and kissed him. We kissed, our tongues intertwining and tasting each other. It was amazing to be this close to him. It was really powerful and intense. I was on the verge of losing it. He took out his penis and carried me up, laying me on the kitchen counter. My legs were still spread, my heels on the edge, and his hard member was pressed between them. He started moving his hips slowly at first and then faster. He reached out and grabbed my wrists. He held my wrists above my head and started moving quickly and firmly. I let out a cry as my hips rose to meet him. His body was glistening with sweat, and his muscles were taut. When he came, he gave a little buck in my arms and tightened his grip on my wrists. When it was over, he fell back against me, his chest pressed against mine. I held on to him, my arms and legs wrapped around him. I was wrapped up in him, my head buried in his shoulder. He said, "Wow," in a low voice. I just nodded, my chest rising and falling with each breath. We didn't say anything as he helped me off the counter, but I could feel there was an unspoken understanding between us, a promise that this was only the beginning. After a bit of rest, he reached down to pick up the towels, which I picked up from the floor. "I'm glad you enjoyed yourself," he replied, handing me the towel. "I did too," I said, laughing, then wrapped the towel around myself. "I'm going to take a shower," I said, reaching out to run a finger along his cheek. "All right," he replied, then gave me a wink. I went to the bedroom, still smiling. Once we'd finished cleaning up, Ben fixed the pipe. He said he'd stop by in a few days to check on it. Then he left, leaving me feeling more energized and alert than I had ever felt before. I spent the rest of the evening feeling on top of the world, thinking about those moments over and over. I was amazed that it had actually happened. Something so intense and intimate had just taken place, and the funny thing was I hadn't even asked for his contact details. It didn't seem like it was necessary at the time. We both knew we'd be seeing each other again the next morning. As I went about my day, I couldn't stop thinking about Ben's touch or the memory of our kiss. It was like a warm feeling that stayed with me, even in the simplest moments. I kept thinking about it, how he looked at me, his hands, his soft lips against mine. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time, and it was really positive and energizing. The days went by, and I figured that maybe that magical evening was a one-time thing. I wasn't sure if I'd get another chance to see Ben. Maybe it was best to leave it as a beautiful memory and let it go, but I had a feeling he'd come back, even if there was no reason to believe he would. Then, one afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. I opened the door and there he was, Ben, standing on my doorstep. He looked a little shy, but he had that same warm smile that had charmed me the first time. "Hi," he said softly, his eyes bright with something I recognized all too well. "Ben, what brings you here?" "I was in the area and thought I'd take a look at that leak. I just wanted to make sure everything was working right." His smile was a little sheepish, and I could tell he was trying to make an excuse, but I was happy to go along with it. "Of course, come on in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He strolled into the kitchen, and we both knew he didn't need to look under the sink. As he said he would, the leak was fixed. Instead, he turned to me, his gaze soft and filled with emotion. With a quiet intensity that I could feel in my bones, it was clear that there was no more pretending. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, letting the silence speak for us. Then, as if on cue, he stepped closer and took my hand. His touch was warm and familiar, and I got that same rush I did the first time we met. It was as if the time that had passed since we last met had only made our connection stronger, making it even harder to resist. He lifted my hand to his lips and gave my knuckles a soft kiss, which made me feel a rush of tenderness. I couldn't help but smile, feeling like I was on par with a girl half my age. It was a bit strange. This unexpected show of affection from someone so much younger felt natural, as though we were meant to find each other in this quiet corner of life. Ben looked at me, his eyes full of kindness and something more, a longing, a desire that matched my own. Without another word, he leaned in and our lips met again. It started off soft and gentle, but quickly became deeper and more urgent. He wrapped his arms around me and pulled me close. I could feel the strength of his embrace and his heartbeat against mine as we stood there, wrapped up in each other's arms. I felt a kind of freedom I hadn't felt in years. It was like stepping into a world where time didn't matter, where there were no worries or doubts, only the warmth of his touch and the comfort of his presence. After a while, we pulled back, both of us a little out of breath, smiling shyly at each other. He gave my cheek a gentle stroke with his thumb. We stood there together for a moment, enjoying the silence and the closeness. It was a kind of intimacy that didn't require words. It was a connection that conveyed more than words ever could. From then on, Ben would drop by from time to time. Sometimes he'd come up with small excuses, like checking the pipes or looking at a loose cabinet door. Sometimes he'd just come by and knock on my door without saying why. I'd let him in. I always looked forward to our afternoon meetings. We had some quiet moments together, laughed at the little things, and enjoyed each other's company. It was easy and natural to be around him. He made me feel alive, as though I'd rediscovered a part of myself I'd forgotten. One evening, as the sun was setting and the room was filled with a warm golden glow, we were sitting together on the couch, my head resting on his shoulder. He ran his fingers through my hair gently, giving me a soothing touch. I felt really calm and at peace. He said quietly, "I didn't expect this with you, either." I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, "But I'm glad it happened." He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with affection, and I felt a warmth spread through me. It was a feeling of belonging that I hadn't realized I was missing. We sat there in silence, just enjoying the closeness and comfort of being together over time. Our bond only grew stronger. Ben became a regular fixture in my life, not just a visitor. I always looked forward to seeing him. He brightened up my days with his sense of humor. We had quiet mornings together. We spent lazy afternoons together, sharing a lot of secrets that helped us get to know each other better. We also enjoyed long walks together, holding hands and chatting about everything and nothing. He told me about his work and his dreams, and I shared some of my own life experiences and memories from years ago. We laughed, we talked, and sometimes we just sat in silence, enjoying each other's company. We spent a lot of time together, just enjoying each other's company. It was a nice surprise, and it came at a time when I least expected it. Ben showed me how good it is to be close to someone and how exciting it is to find a connection that goes beyond age and expectations. He was like a spark that had reignited a warmth in my heart. It was a reminder that life still held surprises, and that love could come in unexpected ways. As time went on, I knew that this bond we shared was something special and rare. It wasn't about the future or making promises. It was about enjoying the moment and feeling truly alive with someone special. In those quiet moments with him, I realized that life is full of surprises. Sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. As we held each other close, I felt at peace. I knew I'd found something special. It was something that would stick with me. It was a memory to treasure, regardless of what the future might bring. Music,